Hooray!
Well, now here is a good one.
So sorry.
Once upon a time, there was a young prince who was ready to find a wife, but he wasn't really interested in any of the princesses he had met. What was he going to do? One dark and stormy night, a bedraggled young woman showed up at the gates of the castle. She was allowed in to get warm and dry, and she seemed happy and energetic, and the prince found her rather charming. She said she was a princess, but she certainly didn't look or act the part. The queen devised a test. They would pile up 20 mattresses with a single pea under the bottom one and send the girl to sleep there. But she tossed and turned all night and never slept a wink. When the charming girl reported this the next morning, the queen said, "Now we know she is a real princess." So she married the prince and lived happily ever after. As afternoon shadows lengthened, the people in the street of the town often briefly heard the sound of a church bell. They said to each other, "The evening bell is ringing, the sun is setting." But the sound of the bell was easily lost amid the noise of the town, and they often wondered whether it came from some church out in the countryside. Hearing of this, the emperor said that whoever found where the sound came from would be called bell ringer to the world. From time to time, many people explored the fields and woods but never found the mysterious bell. Finally, 2 young boys went farther than ever. One was the son of a king, the other a poor peasant boy in wooden shoes. They had to make their way through the dense forest and climb a rocky mountain. By the time they reached the top and looked out over the sea, the sun was already setting, and in the great cathedral of nature, with stars coming out, they heard the bell-like sound of happy spirits singing hallelujahs. Once there was a tin soldier who had 25 identical brothers, all made at the same time. But he was last in line and the tin was nearly gone, so he ended up with only 1 leg. But he was brave, steadfast, and very good at standing very still at attention. Playroom where he lived, there was a toy castle, and in the doorway stood a tiny lady made of paper. She was dressed as a ballerina and held 1 leg up so high that it looked as if she only had 1 leg. And the tin soldier said, "That is the wife for me." But the next day, the children put the tin soldier on the sill of an open window, and he fell 3 stories to the ground. Some passing boys found him, made a little paper boat, and sent him racing down a swift stream. He was very brave as the boat sank, and he was swallowed by a fish, and the fish was caught and taken to market, and bought and taken home by the very family to which he belonged. The soldier was overjoyed to find himself back home, and especially to see that the little ballerina was still in the door of the toy castle. Oh no! A mischievous little boy picks up the toy soldier and tosses him into the fireplace. and the poor soldier melts. And a gust of wind came through the window, picked up the little ballerina, and carried her into the fireplace too, where she landed beside the soldier and burned up with him. The next morning, all that was left to be found in the fireplace was a lump of tin in the shape of a heart. A poor and sick child who had just died was taken up in the arms of an angel and carried to heaven. As if dreaming, the child heard the angel say, "Would you like to gather some flowers along the way to take with us?" And this they did. Along the way, the child noticed a rose bush where some wicked hand had broken the stem, and the half-open rosebuds hung faded and withered on a trailing branch. "Poor rose bush," said the child, "let us take it along so that it may bloom in God's garden." And this they did. God welcomed them to heaven and touched all the flowers, especially the rosebuds, so that they bloomed in wonderful colors. But when God touched the flowers, he also gave each one a voice, so that they could join in the chorus of praise. Little Ida loved flowers, but was discouraged that hers were looking rather faded and withered. Her older friend from next door said that's because they went to a ball last night and stayed up too late, and now they are very tired. So she tried to imagine what it might be like if they could all waltz together. took her doll Sophie from her doll bed so that she could put her flowers there to rest up and be ready to dance again the next night. And at midnight, after her parents were asleep, she got up very quietly. She checked the doll's bed and found the flowers were gone. But she heard music coming faintly from the parlor. So she tiptoed down and peeked in. There was a tall yellow lily sitting at the piano, playing a waltz. And indeed the flowers were merrily dancing around not only hers, but many others from the king's garden too. It was splendid, and after watching a long time, Ida returned to her bed to sleep and dream of what she had seen. When she woke up the next morning, little Ida went to check in Sophie's doll bed and found her flowers there. Not only were they pale and withered, now they were truly dead. For so it must be for flowers, and even for people, and that eventually it is time to go away so that the next summer can bring new and different flowers. And Ida put her dead flowers in a box and carried them out to the garden and had a proper burial service for them. Long ago, the Emperor of China had a magnificent palace and a beautiful garden so large that even the gardener didn't know where it ended. And beyond that, a wonderful forest stretched all the way to the sea, where ships could sail beneath the branches of the great trees. In those branches lived a nightingale, whose singing was so lovely that fishermen would stop their work with their nets to listen. Visitors from all over the world came to admire the emperor's palace. Some of them explored far enough to hear the nightingale sing and carried home their praise for its song. When word of this came back to the emperor, he said, "Why have I not heard of such a thing in my own kingdom? Find this bird and bring it to me." None of the important functionaries in the palace had any idea where to look. But a little servant girl from the kitchen said, "Of course, I have heard it sing." And with her help, they sent an expedition which brought the nightingale to the palace, and it sang marvelous songs for the emperor so beautifully that tears came to his eyes. For some time, the Nightingale remained at the court and was a great celebrity. But one day, a package arrived from UPS. The Emperor of Japan had sent a gift. It was a mechanical nightingale whose body was decorated with diamonds and rubies, with a bobbing tail of silver and gold. When wound up, the machine could sing a pretty good song, although it was always the same song over and over. Duets did not go well. The flashy mechanical bird became the new celebrity, and the live nightingale returned to the forest. But after the mechanical nightingale had been wound up many times, its clockwork spring finally broke, with the most distressing boing. Alas, it could not be repaired any better than to make rather embarrassing croaking sounds. Several years passed, during which the emperor was very sad that he no longer heard the original nightingale song. He became very sick and was so near death that his counselors were already deciding who would be the new emperor. A message was sent asking the nightingale to return to the palace and sing once more. It did this so beautifully that the emperor again shed tears and rallied and became well again, and the nightingale agreed to come back and sing for the emperor every evening as long as she could fly back to the coast each day to sing for the fishermen too. And when the counselors came in the next day, expecting to find the old emperor dead, he stood and smiled graciously and said, "Good morning."
Tell me another story.
Well now, here is one about a flock of hens who have lots to say as they move about the yard, finding seeds to eat. When evening came and they all were going into the hen house, one very respectable hen, who always laid her eggs according to regulation, noticed that one small feather was a little loose. So she reached down and pulled it out with her beak and let it fall to the ground. Jokingly she said, "There it goes. Maybe the more I pluck, the more beautiful I will be." And she went to sleep. But one of her neighbors who heard this could not resist saying to the next hen over,
Did you hear? I mentioned no names, but there is someone here who intends to pluck herself to look attractive. If I were the rooster, I would despise her.
This was overheard by a mother owl nearby, who said to her husband, "There is one of those hens who intends to pluck all her feathers and let the rooster see it. I must warn our neighbors." So she flew over to the dovecote, and the doves let their neighboring hens know.
There is a hen who has plucked all her feathers out, and she may already be frozen to death. There is no doubt about it.
And the bats and the crows had their turn at passing on the news. There is a hen. No, I think there are two who have plucked out all their feathers, caught cold, and died already.
3 hens have died of their unfortunate love for this rooster.
Such fun it is to pass on the news. In each yard where the story was told, it provided plenty of chatter among the hens, especially when the rooster was preening and crowing. Eventually, the story came back around to the very hen yard where it began.
5 hens have plucked themselves naked for the rooster. But then they all pecked each other bloody, and they all fell dead.
And the very first hen, who had first plucked the one feather, did not recognize her own story, and said, "Such scandalous things should not be concealed, but published in the newspapers. Those hens richly deserve their bad end." So it did get into the papers, and now is well known by all. So it is that one little feather may grow into 5 whole hens. was a sweet little boy, 4 years old, who grew sick and died. His 2 older sisters grieved for him, of course, as did their father, but it was his mother who was so bowed down with sorrow that she could not carry on with all her other cares of life. She even neglected to share and help her daughters and husbands to come to terms with their loss. One night, the mother waited until everyone else was asleep and very quietly slipped out of the house. She went to the church graveyard, lay down on the boy's grave, and wept bitterly. Then it seemed as if death itself, robed in black, appeared and asked if she wanted to go on to be with her son. As if in a dream, she seemed to sink down into the earth, but then was bathed in bright light and wonderful music, and saw her child appear before her. He assured her that heaven was wonderful, and that he would be waiting for her to join him someday, but reminded her of his love for his sisters and father, and urged her to care for them. So the mother went back home, awakened her husband with a kiss, and began bringing cheerful and loving care to all her family again. And when they asked how she had regained this strength and faith, she replied, "It came from my child in the grave." A very handsome young butterfly wished to find a bride, so he set out to tour all the flowers. He found them seated demurely on their stalks, just as maidens should be when not yet engaged. but there were so many. It appeared the task of choosing might be a long one. Among the first blooms he visited were the crocus and the snowdrop. Charming little lasses, he thought, but rather formal. Looking for slightly older girls, he found anemones and violets, a little too sentimental, and apple blossoms, but such a marriage might last too short a time. He paused over a gorgeously colored pea blossom, graceful and slender, like those domestic maidens who are so pretty and yet also useful in the kitchen. But he saw nearby a green pod with a withered flower hanging from the end. When he learned that this was the withered blossom's older sister, he thought, "Oh my, you will be like her ere long," and flew away. As spring and summer went by, many different flowers appeared in wonderful shapes and colors, but none was ever quite perfect in the moment. Honeysuckle had a somewhat long face and sallow complexion, not much fragrance in the dahlias, and chrysanthemums a bit dry. Finally, the butterfly turned to the mint growing low on the ground. No colored blossoms, but sweet and fragrant in every leaf. So he made a proposal. But the mint replied by saying, "Only friendship, if you please. As for marrying, let's not appear ridiculous at our age." And so Butterfly was too long in choosing and never did get a wife. So late autumn, colder weather with clouds and rain was not so good for flying about in summer clothes. Fortunately, the butterfly found shelter in a room heated by a stove, just as warm as summer. He still wished for freedom and sunshine, and for a companion. When he flew up against a window pane, he was seen, admired, and caught. And stuck on a pin. Well, here I am, perched on a stalk like the flowers, but then consoled himself finally by saying, I suppose this is something like being married. A mother duck watched with pride as her little children hatched out of their shells, one after another. But the last egg was quite larger than the others, and she had to continue brooding several more days before it hatched. And when it did, out came the biggest, most awkward duckling anyone could remember seeing. At first the mother duck wondered if somehow it had been a turkey egg. But when she led her brood to the water to swim, the big duckling went in along with the others. So it must not be a turkey. But all the others still thought the big duckling was ugly and avoided it. So it had to swim alone. And if the ugly duckling came out of the water and walked around the barnyard, it was persecuted by the hens. And by the turkeys. So the ugly duckling had a lonely life. A few times he saw some other very large birds flying overhead or swimming out across the river. They seemed very beautiful, and their songs filled him with longing. But he remained convinced that he was unworthy. Finally, after a hard winter, with the apple trees now in blossom, he ventured out on the river one day. Out of a thicket on the far shore, 3 beautiful swans swam toward him and greeted him affectionately. At first he was embarrassed. happened to see his own reflection in the water and realized that he too was really a swan. And with joy he was welcomed into his true family. Before the stork delivered Peter, his mother often went into church to pray. She admired the beautiful pictures around the altar, especially the shining golden hair on the angels. She said, "Peter is going to be my golden treasure." When he was born, Peter had flaming red hair, for which he endured much teasing as he grew, but his mother still called him her golden treasure. Peter's father was the town drummer, so naturally Peter learned to play the drum too. But little Peter had other talents as well, and he soon learned to play the violin too. Now, when Peter was 12, there was a war. His mother feared for his safety and wanted him to stay home. But his father thought it a great opportunity to do something heroic. So he went to the war as a drummer boy. In the main battle, things were going badly for his side, and he was ordered to sound a retreat. But he misunderstood the order and sounded attack, charge instead. He beat his drum so hard that it cracked. Peter's drumming rallied the soldiers, and they advanced and won the battle. And Peter was a great hero. He came home to honor and admiration, but for his mother, the only important thing was that her golden treasure had returned safely. As he grew into adulthood, Peter took up again his beloved violin, studied hard, and became a virtuoso. He traveled to foreign countries, performed for kings and queens, and years later returned home with honors even greater than those he won in the war. But even as he played the violin again for his mother, her greatest feeling was that was here still was her golden treasure.
Just one more story, please?
In the city of Florence, on the street called Porta Rosa, there's a marketplace. At its entrance stands a bronze sculpture of a boar, from whose mouth comes a small stream of water which provides a welcome drink on a summer's day. As evening was falling, a poor urchin boy who was tired and hungry came to rest there. The metal was still warm from the sun, and soon the boy climbed onto the pig's back, laid his head on its shoulder, and went to sleep. When midnight came, the boar stirred, gently at first. And he said to the boy, "Let's go for a run and see what we can see." So they started off down one street and then another, faster and faster. They were off on a wild chase. They looked in at the cathedral and saw the tombs of Michelangelo and Galileo. They romped through the Uffizi Gallery and saw paintings and sculptures come to life in glowing colors, with the stone zooming out of David's slingshot. Eventually they tired and slowed down and returned to their starting place. And when the boy woke up in the morning, he wondered if his adventure had been a dream. But as he grew up, he was inspired by that dream and became a great artist himself. And his works are displayed now in the Uffizi Gallery. And that is the end of our stories.
these were Cliff Notes, very dimmed down versions of the Andersen fairy tales. Many of them are longer and much more detailed and quite witty. And for one example of that, I've run off some copies of the Tale of the Nightingale. It has a lot of fun poking pins in the balloons of pretentious people, and I enjoyed it a lot. If you'd like to have a copy, I have some here.